On today's episode, we talk to the author Todd Harra of Last Rites, a book talking about our profession, the history, and where it's going from there. So, Doc Nick, you better listen in.
Listen in, read it up.
Let's talk about death, baby. Let's talk about grief and mourning. Is it argumental or existential? What's it mean to me? Let's talk about death.
Hi, I'm Benny Cabal, and I'm a funeral professional. And I'm Nicholas Cabal, a psychologist.
Hey, Nick, let's talk about death.
Let's do it.
Well, Doc Nicholas, we have quite the guest today. We have Todd Harra, and he just released a book, Last Rites. We're going to talk to him about it a little bit. And Nick, just so you know, Todd and me are on the National Emerging Leaders Program together. So we know each other. So it might feel a little off today. We might be some inside jokes going on today, Doc Nick. So
Oh, I'm sorry. I fell asleep a little bit. Were you guys talking or
Well,
Benny was just saying we go way back.
we go so many years back, way before me and you ever met, Nick. So Todd, welcome to Let's Talk About Death. First and foremost, awesome book. I got to read through it, and I'm quite impressed. And to be honest, it kind of goes along with what Doc and I have been trying to do since the beginning of this podcast. So give us a little taste about this book, maybe some of your other books, just how you got into this, why this was so important, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, essentially, Benny, it's my love letter to funeral service. I read this book by David Ashinsky about, it was called Bellevue, 3 Centuries of Medicine and Mayhem. And it's about the Hospital Bellevue. And the only reason, I picked it up is because that's where we did our clinicals at McAllister, where I went to mortuary school in Bellevue. So I thought, okay, this will be, somewhat interesting. And, thinking, how interesting could a book about a hospital really be? And, he just really made, this history of medicine kind of leap off the page to the layperson. I don't know really anything about medicine. And I was just, absolutely, enthralled by this book. And I thought, you know what? Nobody's done this for funeral service. Nobody's written a book that the layperson can pick up and read about the history of what we do and say, oh, that's why they do this or that's why they do that. The books out there, they're either, textbook, the Habenstein and Lammers that I'm sure you had to read for mortuary school, or they're more fluff. So it's a personal experience or a memoir, but no one's ever, put down on paper something that, as I say, my mom can pick this up and read it and enjoy it. And my mom, is not in the business, knows nothing about the business other than, what she's read in Last Rites.
I agree with you. And I think the biggest problem that we've always had is we don't really clarify what we do and why we do it, right? The older generation of funeral directors were always like, they'll just understand that. They'll know that, right? That's just how it's done. So they understand it. And what we really found out is most people don't. And all they're really trying to do is figure it out. So you really kind of go through in this book, really why we do and where it started and why we do what we do. When you were going through this book, did anything catch you off guard, Todd, when you were writing it?
Maybe how circuitous of a route, it took to kind of get to where we are. Some of these traditions, really, their origins, I didn't honestly realize they went back that far. One of the big things that kind of surprised me was, people always talk about the cost of a funeral, how expensive a funeral is today. And, honestly, they are expensive. But compared to, earlier points in history, colonial history, in some sense, they've gotten cheaper. Back in colonial America, families were expected to offer mourning gifts to the people that came to pay their respects. And they were also expected to feed them and house them. These folks had traveled, miles over, country roads, and, getting home was no easy feat. And in some instances, the funeral bill would total 1/5 of the total estate. and that was giving out mourning gifts where weren't cheap items, rings, mourning gloves, and fabric was difficult to make back then. So these things cost money. And, the funeral bills were, in some cases, astronomical.
Right. No, and I really liked. I was reading the chapter on the mushroom suit. The mushroom suit. I thought that was so interesting. I never heard it actually called that way. I knew exactly what it was when I started reading the chapter on green burials, and Doc and I have started talking about green burials to people, and even in our small town, we're starting to get some conversation about green burials. But I really thought that was an interesting chapter that you came up with on the future. Where do you see funerals going? Where do you see our profession going?
Oh my gosh. Honestly, I wish I had a crystal ball and I could let you in on the secret. But, I kind of laid it out in that chapter. Emerging trends, will they come to fruition? Um, but I think we could also tie in, our project with the National Emerging Leaders. We're doing a project on the future of funeral service for the NFDA. And what's your topic for the project?
Death education for high schoolers.
Okay. So trying to loop, the next generation of funeral directors and, people that are going to innovate in funeral service into the profession. Um, you know, my group's working on virtual reality funerals, which is something I didn't put into the book. I had to submit this over a year ago to my editor, and that's certainly something that it's like, man, I wish I had thought of that a year ago, because I definitely think, especially with COVID and this shift towards more technology in funerals, you know in 10, 20 years, we may start seeing 100% virtual reality funerals where, Benny, you put on a pair of VR goggles, I put on a pair of VR goggles, and we meet, you know, out there in the metaverse and pay our respects to, Mrs. Smith's family.
And I actually thought like it'd be interesting to see if like flowers, right? Instead of flowers, like just big boards behind the casket that people could just like send, virtual flowers or virtual
Hmm.
messages, or because that's where we're headed, right? That's exactly where we're headed. Um, and it's interesting too, because I do find that COVID, as much as it did bring the virtual funeral really to the forefront, it also started bringing back some traditions that we haven't seen in a while. It's an interesting scope to see where we're going to do funerals in the next couple of years, because I do think for some, they didn't have the experience they wanted, and they're really starting to realize the value of the funeral. I'm not saying everyone, but do you see what I'm saying with that, Todd? Would you agree with that, or?
So we've had a couple families where, um, the grandkids will say to their parents, let's say grandmom died during COVID, and at that point, things were on lockdown, and they just did a direct cremation, no service. And then grandfather dies, and they say to their parents, I don't want to do that. I didn't like that. So we're seeing that pushback of the direct disposal, which I think is great. People need to do something, whether it be a service, and it's you see it. It's different for every family. What's right for that family, but honoring that person in some way. Whether it's a full blown memorial service or funeral service with viewing, or you just do something in the backyard. It's important to do something. So yes, we have seen kind of that pushback against this direct disposal that we saw for a very brief time during COVID.
Yeah, I agree. Now, Todd, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, how did you become a funeral director? Where are you working? Why did you start writing books? Like, what's a little of your bio here, Todd?
Sure, absolutely. So my great 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 grandfather was a cabinet maker in Milford, Delaware. So that's about 60 miles south of me. I'm in Wilmington, Delaware. And by default, he made all the towns coffins at the time. And his son got into the business. His son fought for the Union Army, and when he came back from the war, he took his father's business and added embalming to the repertoire. So my family's been doing this on and off for quite some time. I work for my uncle up here in Wilmington. Uh, Business has been around for 111 years at this point. So, it's an old established, I don't want to say small town. Wilmington's, a small city, but your typical uh, family-run funeral home that you find in just about every city you go to. And I've been doing this, ever since I got out of college. Summer after college, needed a job, so I started working for the funeral home part time. Washing cars. You hear that story all the time, and I think the job found me. It's one of those things I never saw myself going into this, but just being around the men and women that were doing what I'm now doing. I thought, wow, this is something I want to do, and so went to mortuary school, and here I am 17 years later. Um, as far as the writing, that's something that I've always done. I was the guy who was writing for my fraternity magazine or entering writing contests, and whenever I give presentations about writing, I always tell people, I kind of got into writing books in perhaps the most unusual way, and this is something you were teasing me about before we started recording. So back in 2007, I was part of the Men of Mortuaries calendar. That 2007 is when we actually photographed the calendar for the 2008 calendar. And this guy friend of mine now out in Long Beach, Ken McKenzie, he has now 3 funeral homes. He created this breast cancer foundation called CAM Cares. And it's a type of foundation that it's providing, I call it like boots on the ground support. Woman gets sick with breast cancer. She has to take time off from work to get treatment. So some cases it's reducing your income, and it becomes kind of that slippery slope of reduced income. And, so CAM Cares provides money for, groceries, plane tickets, childcare, all that stuff that you don't even necessarily think about until you're going through, a health crisis like that. So Ken was using the calendar to fund his foundation. And, it's just a great fundraiser, a way to get people talking in the community. Honestly, Benny, I would say a week doesn't go by still. And it's been, 15 years? Just last week, someone came through the front door and goes, "Hey, you're that guy from the calendar." So it's just kind of something fun, quirky, off the wall to do. But about 6 months or so after the calendar came out, Ken calls me. He goes, "Hey, I've got another idea for another stream of revenue for my breast cancer foundation." He goes, I've collected all these stories from all these contacts I've made over the years of kind of like, crazy, off the wall, humorous, interesting, sad, poignant, whatever you want to say, stories about our profession, undertaking. And I want to do a book about them. He said, "Would you write it for me?" And I said, "No, I'll do it with you." I was like, this is a fantastic idea. No one's done it before. At the time, the only book about our profession out was The Undertaking by Thomas Lynch. There were no other books at that time. Caitlin Dowdy hadn't come out with her book. So, fast forward, Ken sends me all the material. I put it together in a book, and we kind of went through all the machinations of getting a book published. That's kind of a whole nother podcast on how to get your book published. But that was a whole process in and of itself. And we had agents after agent going, this is the worst idea I've ever heard. This this book will never work. This book is, and I think we went through something. The 118th agent or something finally said yes. She sold it the next day. The book has been reprinted 9 times. There's 2 editions of it. It continues to sell to this day. And that was kind of how I got into writing books.
I think what we really want to know, and I think this is what the book is for, and maybe what the podcast is for, but maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, is why value the funeral director? I think that's what a lot of people want to know. Why value what you guys do?
People call us in a time of crisis, and it's almost hard to quantify, but I think Benny will back me up on this. A lot of times when people walk through that door to make those funeral arrangements, there's uncertainty, maybe a little bit of panic in their eye. They don't know what to do. And 99 times out of 100, when they leave that funeral arrangement conference, they're calmer, they've got a plan in place, and they feel good about the choices they made. Were they hard choices? Absolutely. But they know that they've come to a person that's going to help them put their loved one to rest, get them to where they need to be, however you want to call it. But we're there to, essentially facilitate them starting the grieving process.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think when it comes down to a funeral professional, and I think Todd and I, when we're talking about this, we're talking about the good ones, the ones that have been doing this for a long time and are good at what they do. There is a sense of them hearing, listening, and being able to walk with that family through that experience. I think what gets lost in translations, like books from Mitford and all the people who had bad experiences, is they didn't get to right there. They didn't get to experience the good. They didn't get to experience a funeral director that literally stops everything that they're doing to try to see through your eyes and help you get through that death. Now, there is certain things, Todd brought it up. Funerals are expensive. It's just part of what it is. But it doesn't change the fact that going to see a doctor is expensive. Going to see any professional is expensive. You're paying for that profession. Like, you're paying for the time that they took, whether it be schooling, whether it be the apprenticeship, you're paying money for their wisdom in that experience. Do we always get it 100% right? Hell no, because nobody has the formula on grief.
Right.
But I can say we do, and the good funeral directors do the best that they can in every different scenario, because every family is so different. And we are in this ever-changing climate where we are trying to be as humanistic as we can while trying to keep our funeral home afloat, which can be a struggle, because we don't have a magic ball and we're going to get 10 cases every week. It's not consistent. It's not consistent at all. The Grim Reaper does not tend to be. So I think why people should understand, I think that's a double-edged thing, because I think people don't want to really know what we go through. They say it all the time. I don't want to see you again. It's good to see you, but I hope I don't see you again for a while. Like that. If you really look at that, that's a hard statement. That's a hard statement to say to a human being. We get it. We understand what you're saying, but it still hurts. It still makes us feel like, okay, we're just isolate us even more than we already are in the profession that we chose. But I think really to do it, we're doing something that isn't something anybody can do. It's a calling. There's a certain extra. Explaining this is hard too, because I don't want to just toot air up, up our butts.
No,
here.
but I think you guys need to. You know what I mean? I think that's the important part, is that we need, I think, as a society, to humanize what a funeral director really is and who they are, and how
Well,
much time and effort and energy and love, whatever words we're going to use here, positive words for you guys. Like, that's, I think, what people need to hear is what actually goes on with you guys. Because I think that's the reason why people are like, oh, I'll see you when I need to see you, right? Is because they haven't humanized you guys. They haven't understood who you are. They haven't understood, they haven't taken the time to understand what is it about you guys that's so important. Does
well,
that make
and
sense?
no, you're absolutely right. They weren't there when we took care of a 3-year-old and went back to our homes and picked up our 3-year-old child. They weren't there at 4 o'clock in the morning when we went to pick up their loved one who committed suicide. They weren't there at the scene of a crime, seeing some trauma that will stay in our heads for years. They weren't there for all the sleepless nights we're worried about. Hey, did we put that flower in the right spot?
Right.
These little things are everything because it's a show. We get one performance for each of these families. There's no understudies. There's no second chances. Like, okay, guys, we know that funeral sucked. We're gonna take it from the top. We're gonna
Guys,
take it
come
from
back.
the top.
Come back next week. We'll get this right. Yeah. No, I get it. But I want to hear Todd's. I want to hear Todd's opinion on this.
Are you asking about, people saying, it was great to see you, but I hope I don't see you for 4 or so years? Is that what you're asking me?
Just humanize you. Like, what makes a funeral director so valued, so important? What in your mind's eye, right? You wrote a book about the history and how it's gotten to this point. But I think what we really need to say to all the viewers out there, listeners out there, is that there's a reason why these funeral homes exist, right? And especially like a family owned one that's been going on, you said, for 100 years. Like, I'm going to clap because that in itself is amazing, right? And also, if you're anything like Benny and I, super stressful because that puts a lot of pressure on you. Because if you're going to be
Nick, Todd is not stressed. He's not writing books.
okay,
He doesn't
right,
have a
right.
family to worry about.
Right,
This is an easy thing for him to do.
But you get what I'm saying, Todd. Like, I know that one of the things that, being around a funeral home my whole life and, witnessing my dad and witnessing all the other local funeral homes around here and funeral directors that have done really well for themselves. Like, one of the things that they really struggle with is telling people how much they do. And I get that some people would look at that as advertising, but like, I don't think that's advertising. I think that's just speaking truth. And that's what I would like to hear from you is, what is your truth in this?
I think both of you, having grown up in a funeral home and watching your dad, just know that the local undertaker, the local funeral director, is just, woven into the fabric of the community. You see a local funeral director and typically they're involved in the Knights of Columbus. They're in the Masons. They're coaching the Little League. They're a member of the Rotary. They're on the church council. They're part of the PTA. They're doing all of these things that's, so much more than just, what the profession calls us to do. We're part of the community in every community. And that's not even counting our, hobbies and other things, which, frankly, I think is a function of our generation. My uncle, um, he eats, breathes, and sleeps undertaking. So much so, that's him. And I see a lot of men, mostly of that generation, some women, and their whole identity is wrapped up in what they do. And you get into some of the funeral directors in our generation, and I know you two have a band, you've got a podcast, you do other things that might be related to what we do in the profession, but in some sense they're separate, but they still have their own identity. It's like, oh, there's Dr. Nick and Benny, they have that band, and when grandmom dies, they're going to call you because they know you from the community, not just as a funeral director, but as a member of the community. They know they can trust you.
Well, I think that's it right there. You just said a word that I think a lot of people need to maybe just let sink in is this idea of trust. Because when someone we love so much, right, we can't put words to, dies, who do we trust these people to, right? And I think that, again, this kind of ropes around to my big question here is why is there so much value to what you guys do? And again, like I said, I understand that there's kind of this, I wouldn't say like avoidance of talking about what you guys do, but there is, because you guys don't want to be salesmen, right? And I get that, and I understand that, because to me that kind of goes against the whole, like, we want people to know what we do, but not tell them what we do. But like, I think people need to hear that. Does that make sense? Like, I think people need to humanize you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and if they had the opportunity to sit in a room with 6 funeral directors around a table, they'd get everything that you're saying, Doc. I think it's
if they didn't fall asleep, right?
Right. Well, most of the time. But to be honest, I think there's a comfortability on both sides. I think there's a comfortability from our families that we serve, that they're going to take care of it. They're not going to complain about it. They're going to be there when we need them. Their lives exist to be our funeral director. And that right there is an extreme burden, but that's what it is, because death is 24/7. Death is 365. Death doesn't happen between the hours of 9 and 4 between Mondays and Fridays. And I think that gets lost due to grief, right? We're dealing with anger, depression, bargaining, acceptance, denial, all the 5 steps plus 12 or whatever the new number that everybody's coming up. But the idea is, I think they lose track that we are people when they're going through their grief at times. And it's just because of the nature of the beast, right? They're going through grief. And then we as funeral directors have to drop everything on a dime to be there to take care of that. But I do agree with you, Todd, that I think the new generation of funeral directors are starting to be like, hey, guess what? We're also fathers. We're also people that love to make paper airplanes or be in bands or write books or are
How many funeral directors
artistic.
do you know make paper airplanes? That's my number one question for this podcast right now.
I could name you 12 right now.
Yeah, right there. That's secretly, Doc Nick, that's what we all do. That's part of the curriculum in mortuary sciences. Who can make the best paper? I don't know, but I do agree with, I think we're heading there, Doc.
Hey, we're going green, right? We could have some that
biodegradable paper airplanes.
Caskets made out of paper airplanes. There we go.
It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad. Todd,
we're going to space now, right?
There's the idea right there.
Well, you know, you were saying you wish you could make like a part 2, right? The Laster rights, right? Like you could buy the part 2 of this book, and that's the beauty of this too, is you can write a book 5 to 10 years down the line when things change. Because I honestly think, in some ways, Doc, we are. I think Todd and I's generation of funeral directors are doing things very differently. We're communicating with each other, which has never been really done before, a lot more. And I think the honest to God thing is we are starting to show our hobbies. We are starting to show that we are humans.
Are you guys doing it differently or just being more open about it? Because I feel like the older generation did do things like that. Like they were on bowling leagues and they did fun stuff, you know? And I think that's what I'm saying right now is I don't think the public knew that funeral directors were people too. They were dads, they were families, they were, bowling guys, they were, 50-50 calls calling people like, well, 50, get your 50-50 ticket.
What if there was a psychologist who wrote a book about funeral directors humanizing them so we didn't have to do it
I'm working on it, guys. It's in the process. I talked to Todd's guys. They weren't on ball yet. Okay.
Well, the problem was there's this competing calendar thing between my calendar and Todd's calendar.
Yeah, the
who's
psychologist,
sexier? It's a whole thing. Well, that'll be part 2 of the
the
podcast.
psycho bourgeois photograph didn't go well, guys. I'm not gonna lie. It was it wasn't beach season for me.
Well, when you started bringing Freudism in there, it got a little wild.
It's all about the Electra and the
So Todd, let's get back to the book a little bit. So where can people find it? Where can people, see where to find this book? How do they get it? Is it everywhere?
So you can get it online, barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, or, I'm always a proponent, support your local bookseller. Go down to that mom and pop brick and mortar shop and buy it there. So you can get it anywhere.
Very cool. And how many books do you have as of now?
This is number 5.
Number 5. And are they all funeral profession related, or?
They are, yes. Yeah.
Okay. That's really cool. I give you credit. I know how hard it is to come up with a book, let alone 5. So no, I think it's wonderful, and I think if anybody listening to this, get the book. It does a really good job of explaining where we came from. And I think that's a huge part. And I know it's only a little part in your book, Todd, but I think it's very important that you put that in, because I think if we really don't understand the history of something, we never really understand it at all. And I think you do a great job of kind of setting the stage, going to, where they are now, and then where we're headed a little bit, right? You say it even in the book. I don't have a magic ball, but this is kind of the trend we're seeing. And that could change. We don't know. A catastrophe or a world war could change the way that we funeral direct in the future. We may not have funeral directors in the future. It would be a very sad thing, but that's a possibility. And I think this book gives us a little more humanization. Is that a word, Nick? Will that work today?
We'll go with it.
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Go with it.
We'll go with it. It's not the best word, but I mean, so for you, what does a funeral director mean, Todd? For you,
funeral director is and you touched on this. This is somebody that will drop everything. Get up from Christmas dinner with their family. Get up 2 a.m. if it's 3 feet of snow out, and answer that call and go out to serve that family, and help them get into a space where they know their loved one is going to be safe and taken care of, and that funeral director is going to plan a service that is meaningful to the living, because it reflects the life that their loved one led. So there's the aspect of actually, getting up and physically moving their loved one, but also, kind of the spiritual aspect and the ceremonial aspect we help people with, as far as, letting them know, like, hey, we're going to help you put this service together. And, a service that is going to be difficult, but hopefully have a lot of meaning. And hopefully you'll look back on this service and say, that was a memorable day. And, maybe, in 10 years or 20 years, we all know grief doesn't have a timeline. You'll maybe even be able to look back with a little smile, like, hey, that was a special day, and hopefully they'll be able to say, I'm glad we had that service.
What in your profession as a funeral director / embalmer, what is the biggest thing you struggle with? And what is the thing that you look forward to the most in your profession?
I would say there are 2 things. The schedule can be difficult. You know that, Benny. The best laid plans, and then a call comes in, and it's reshuffling, everything. So I've been doing this 17 years, and still, sometimes the schedule can get to be a bit daunting. And I don't know if there will ever be a magic bullet, an easy solution for that. I think the key for us is just trying to find the best work-life balance, and also, find ways that we can decompress at the end of it, to kind of help relieve those stresses. Because honestly, every job has its own stresses. You just got to figure out how to deal with them. I would say that the hardest part of the job for me, and it's only gotten more difficult since I've had children of my own, is dealing with a child that has passed, and I can't quite put my finger on it, and maybe your Dr. Nick can help me with this, but maybe it's unrealized potential. I don't know. Or looking at that child and thinking, oh my gosh, I can remember when my daughter or my son, was that age, or, just thinking, oh my gosh, my daughter, loved playing with her dolls at that age, or, it's things like that. But, doing children's funerals has, even after 17 years, hadn't gotten any easier. And, those are the ones, that take the biggest piece of my heart, each and every one of them. So, and I would say kind of the opposite end of the spectrum is the other answer to your question. The part of the job that, I look forward to the most is, let's call it the good death, the 100-year-old person that led a great life. And, we can give that family, a fitting ceremony that they're happy with, because it you know captured that person's life in a meaningful way. And the family just comes up to you afterwards and says, my gosh, that was so great, or mom or dad looks so good. A compliment like that, as you know, Benny, that means the world to any funeral director. Just knowing that you've put people in a good place like that.
It's
No, I
interesting. It's interesting that you brought up the idea of good death, and maybe food for thought to leave all the listeners out there with is that you mentioned the idea of being 100, but like I know a lot of people that died at like 65, 70 and had a fabulous life. And then I'm gonna leave this with a Billy Joel quote, because Billy Joel is my boy. He will always be my spirit animal. Um, Only the good die young, right? I mean, so maybe this idea, this Hollywood fantasy of dying in your bed, comfortably sleeping, you know, that's not how most of us go. And I also think we need to confront that. And I think we need to say that, it doesn't matter when it is that time, as long as you live life to the fullest, it doesn't matter. That's my opinion, I guess, for all you listeners out there.
I agree with you, but do you feel like society has put these I don't know, artificial age restraints on death? I mean, I don't know about you, Benny, but if we lay out a 65-year-old, it's people come in, it's, oh, she was taken way too young. 65, people call that young these days, even if they lived a fantastic life and did, everything life had to offer. People will still say, oh my gosh, they were taken way too young. How do you feel
Yeah,
about that?
absolutely. And if we go back, 200, 300 years, people were living till what, 40, if they made it that far. The idea that you were going through your midlife crisis at 20, like, hell, it's been quite the 20 years, but I think age is relative. Just like I think the cause of death is always relative, right? It doesn't really matter if somebody is ready to go and somebody's lived the life that they wanted to live. I think that is, but you're absolutely right, Todd. They could be 70 years old and I'll hear it like, they went so early. They're young. So yeah, I don't know. It's age is relative, and it's a struggle. But I just want to thank you again, Todd, for being on the show today. If you haven't heard or you haven't gotten it, Last Rites by Todd Harra. There's also other catalog of books he said he's got. So go to your local mom and pop store and tell them to pull it off the shelf and give it to you, because it's going to be a good read, and it helps you if you have or questions about what we do and why we do it. There's some answers in that book. So thank you, Todd, for being on there.
Has Let's Talk About Death done a giveaway yet on your podcast?
We have
No.
not.
No. Okay, so I'll be the first. So you guys see the hat that I'm wearing? It says Last Rites. It's got the colonial memento mori skull behind 2 cross trocars.
Yes.
So I want to give 2 of those away to your listeners. So Benny, can you pick a number between 1 and 10?
Do you want me to say it out loud?
Just say it out loud.
Okay, 7.
7. And Doc Nick, between 11 and 20?
11.
11. Okay. So the 7th and 11th listeners to email me with the subject line, Let's Talk About Death, in the subject line, I will mail you a Last Rites hat. I'll eat the shipping costs. Okay. And my email is todd@toddharra.com.
Thank you, Todd. And if you heard it out there, listeners, email them and we'll get those hats out to you. But thank you again, Todd, for being on. Let's talk
Thanks,
about
Todd.
death.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
If you have any questions or thoughts about the book, feel free to write us here at Let's Talk About Death at Let's Talk About Death pod@gmail.com. Like us, subscribe us. You know what to do, because if you ain't talking about death,
You're not living. Have a great night.